Good evening, everyone. I'm Anne Mossop from the Centre for Ideas at the University of New South Wales, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the pioneering venue, bringing you to the Paddington RSL as a wonderful wet weather alternative to being in the courtyard at Art and Design. I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. Tonight is one of the first events that we're presenting as the Centre for Ideas, the university's new platform for hosting public conversations about important issues. It's also part of the grand challenge on inequality, led by Richard Holden and Ros Dixon, which is a university initiative that aims to, through all kinds of things, teaching, research, these kinds of conversations, to illuminate some of the most complex problems of our time. This is the first event in what is an amazing week for us. On Saturday, we're hearing from Franklin Foer talking about the existential threat of big technology, and Michael Sandel on truth at Carriageworks. There's a flyer about that on your seats if you haven't already signed up, but if there are free tickets are available for University of New South Wales staff and students through the university events website. We're here tonight to hear from Andres Serrano. He's here in part because of his work being represented in a wonderful exhibition that is on now at the UNSW galleries. In Your Dreams is an exhibition where 14 international artists of film and photography are showing us different aspects of inequality from around the globe. It's an exhibition that opened during Sydney Festival. It continues until the 7th of April. If you haven't seen it, please go and do it. I'm sure you will be even more inspired to do that now. But it's a wonderful exhibition curated by Felicity Fenner from the university and Cherie McNair from the Australian Centre for Photography. The format of this evening is we're going to hear about 20 minutes introduction from Andre to his work. Then he's going to be in conversation with Monique Shafter, Walkley Award-winning journalist and filmmaker who's currently reports for the 7:30 report. And then there'll be time for some questions and discussion from you. It's my privilege to welcome Andre and Irina to Sydney and to introduce him for this talk. Andre was born in New York City. He studied art at the Brooklyn Museum and Art School. His work came to worldwide public attention in the late 80s with his controversial work, Piss Christ. The ongoing notoriety of this work belies the length and depth of his subsequent career. As a photographer, we've seen incredibly rich body of work, portraitures, series of photographs, including Objects of Desire, the Klan, America 2000 to 2001 to 2004, Nomads, Signs of the Times, and the two series that he's talking of work that are included in the exhibition, Residents of New York, Denizens of Brussels. His work also includes videos, albums, and he's noted for the incredibly rich visual palette, but also the depth and texture of cultural references from religion, art, and all aspects of contemporary society. This is seen and recognised as one of the most important and significant contemporary artists. His many solo exhibitions around the globe, and his work, of course, is held in significant public and private collections. So it's my great pleasure to welcome him here and to invite him to come onto the stage. Andre.
So I'm going to show you images that I've done with the homeless, but also other images to give you a little referral to see that I'm not just the guy who takes pictures of homeless people. In fact, the homeless are a very small part of my general body of work. But I'm going to start with the Nomads. This is a series that I did of homeless people in 1990. And I photographed these people in the subways in New York City late at night. And the idea was to do a tribute to Edward Curtis and his photograph photographs of Native Americans at the turn of the century. I always was a great admirer of Curtis's work. And with the Nomads, I wanted to do studio portraits of the homeless in the same way that Curtis felt he was photographing a vanishing race. I felt like I was photographing a vanishing people, meaning individuals who were on the verge of some extinction and would disappear soon. And so I photographed them in a studio context, meaning I brought a background, I had assistants, lights, and so I purposely removed them from the environment I found them in, the subway, and put them into a tableau photography setup. Now, I'm glad you mentioned that I went to art school because I studied painting and sculpture. And one of the things I hate being called is a photographer. I mean, I've been called worse, but I don't like being called a photographer. That's top on the list. Because I feel like I learned everything I know about art from Marcel Duchamp, who taught me and everyone else that anything, including a photograph, could be a work of art. So when I take pictures, I'm conceiving of it as a work of art rather than just a picture. And in fact, I don't even call my photographs, I call them pieces. And the photographs are always titled by the name of the person or the thing that I'm photographing, because I like to be quite literal with the photographs. Because they are photographs, I like to give the audience some idea of what they're looking at. So this is Bertha, and this is Mary. And this is Payn, P-A-Y-N, but still it's could be an image of pain as well. And this is Sir Leonard, and he was very proud of his buckle, which if you look at it close, it reads, "In denim we trust." And this is Roosevelt. I mean, sometimes, the image and the title comes together on purpose and sometimes accidentally. I mean, what better name for a person who looks like this than to be named, a Roosevelt? And this is Curtis. Curtis was a well-known beggar, if you will, a character, a street character. He wasn't a beggar. He was a street character. And he used to have a carriage that he piled with stuff. And he was so well known that when he died, the New York Times called me to give this image to them for their obituary of Curtis. So Curtis was someone, and I was very happy to provide them with the photograph. Now, immediately after doing the Nomads, I wanted to continue doing some sort of portraits, but I wanted for them to be unusual portraits. And I thought, well, if someone was wearing a mask, that would be an unusual portrait. And when I thought of masked people, I immediately thought of the Klan. And because, of course, I'm not white, I'm Hispanic, that was a challenge for them and for me to work with the Klan. Actually, not so much for me. I go where my work takes me. I don't care. But for them, I was very, very happy that I got to photograph 8 or 9 people, including this Klanswoman. And they're all from Stone Mountain City in Georgia. This is the ex-Imperial Wizard. And another Klansman. When I first met the Imperial Wizard, he asked to meet him somewhere, in a park late at night. And I went with my assistant in a car, and then it's in the middle of nowhere, darkness, and then this car pulls up, and two guys come out. And one guy, which I later found out was David Holland, the Imperial Wizard, he says to his friend, "This is the notorious Andres Serrano." And I was like really impressed and flattered that the head of the Klan called me notorious. When I was doing this work, I had an assistant who said to me, they look very beautiful. They almost look like recruitment posters for the Klan. And that took me aback, and it made me feel a little bit funny, uncomfortable, that that people could see this work as somehow flattering to the cause. But then I realized I got to do it, and I got to let people see what they want to see in these pictures. My role as an artist is to make it beautiful, make it big, and make it real. So I didn't go back to the homeless until 2013, when I started to see, I'm a New Yorker, born and raised, been in New York all my life, and I started to see more homeless than ever on the streets of New York City. And what I saw was people holding these signs asking for money. And so I decided to do a work that was completely conceptual, no photographs involved, called The Sign of the Times, where I went around collecting, buying signs from homeless people. And what I would say to them was I would say, listen, I see, I'm an artist and I see things a certain way. And what I see is all these signs, people asking for money. And to me, every sign is a story. Can I buy you a story? I'll give you $20. And so they always said, yeah, And so I bought over 200 signs, and I would walk every day. I would walk to the locations, and the locations were Manhattan. So sometimes I would walk for 3-4 hours. Toward the end, I was walking 8, 9, 10 hours a day looking for signs, looking for people with signs. And I felt like I had to do this conceptually as an artist. I had to do it that way because they're on the street, and so I had to, get into the streets myself and do my work there alongside them. And so after collecting those signs and making a video called The Sign of the Times, I had, a commitment to do a project for an organization called More Art. They do politically, socially conscious work with artists, public installations. And so I decided I want to continue doing something on the homeless. And what I did was a series called The Residents of New York. I didn't want to call them homeless because that's a cliche. And it's such a cliche that 3 of the signs that I bought from people, from the homeless, said homeless blah, 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 meaning, yes, I know, we know, you don't want to hear this shit, it's a cliche, and homeless blah, blah, blah. So to me, I didn't want to use homeless in the title, so I called it The Residents of New York because I wanted to acknowledge them as residents of the city. Even if they lived on the streets, they were still residents of the city, of New York City. And we did this project for as an installation in the New York City subway station at Greenwich Village, the West 4th Street subway station. And, it was along all those long corridors. I decided I wanted to put up posters of homeless people in lieu of those ads that I get sick and tired of looking at that are trying to sell me something. And so, thanks to More Art inviting me and finding the money for it. I mean, I also spent some of my money on this project as well. They had a budget, I don't know how much, probably cost over $100,000 to rent these spaces. And then, and I had a budget to work on it, but I spent $10,000 of my own money on it as well, because when I start something, I got to finish it. I don't care how much it costs. And it was interesting because, you'd see these pictures in the subway station, and then you'd go outside and you see homeless right there. I think my work is very obvious, at least it is to me, and I see what everyone else is seeing, but sometimes people try to ignore it. It's only natural. Along with these posters that said a little bit about the show, there was another poster that had a list of many names. And someone said to me, "Is that the names of the donors?" And I said, "No, that's the name of the homeless." Because these people, even it's a relationship. I mean, they, first of all, I do an operation, meaning I'm not a point and shoot guy with a digital camera. I shoot film. I need assistance, lights sometimes. And so, and also, we need to do this as a collaboration, a partnership. So I pay you, you posing for me. And so we'd be setting up, working, and sometimes people would walk by with iPhones or cameras, and they'd start taking pictures, and the homeless would say, no, don't do that. We're working here. He's paying me. Don't come here and disturb us, So, with these homeless, and some of the people I photographed, they're in sleeping bags. You don't see their faces. But after a while, when you see enough of these images, you realize that every image has a name. And so you realize that I know who those people are, even if you don't see them. Not only do I know who they are, I give them a name. And you know that they know that I'm there too. It's not a sneak photograph. So in addition to the subway station, there was also, the pictures were also put in these bus stations around the city. This guy's name is Wolfman. I asked her, "Why is the banana in the cup?" And she said, "Food," to indicate it's money for food. This guy, his name is Ryan, and that's his wife, Shelly. And when I photographed him before, I had seen them. I had bought a sign from them before. So I approached them, and I said to them, and whenever I'm talking to the homeless, I always, crouch down to talk to them eye level. I never talk from above, I always go down, and I say, "Listen, can I ask you something? Can I talk to you?" They would say, "Yeah," they want to hear what you have to say. And so these people, I knew them. I had bought a sign from them before. And I said, "Listen, I'm not buying signs anymore. I'm taking pictures, and I pay both of you each to do the portrait." He said, "Sure." And then I looked in his eyes, and I said, "Wow, your eyes are very yellow." And he said, "Yeah, I've got a problem with my liver." And but he said, "But I'm taking the medication," went to the hospital. So I took his picture. And then about 3 weeks later, a homeless guy from the neighborhood who knew I had taken his picture came up to me and said, "You know that guy, Red?" They called him Red. He said, Red, that you took his picture?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, he died." And, there was a woman, actually one of the women involved with More Art. When she saw this picture, she said to me, "I see this guy all the time, and I never liked him." She said, "But when I see the picture, when I see the portrait of you, I feel something for him." And then I said, "Well, he died." And then she felt really bad. But, in a way, I was glad. It was nice that she said that she said, like this image made him more human, sympathetic. And, that's all I try to do. I try to find a common ground with my sitters, whether they be homeless people, the Ku Klux Klan, anybody, I try to find the person inside there, because I'm a person, so it's a person-to-person relationship I have with my sitters, and also no judgment. For this series, I also did something I hadn't done in over 30 years. I actually shot some black and white images. When I first started shooting pictures, I started shooting in black and white. And then after a year or two of black and white pictures, I went to color and never went back to black and white again until I did these shots. So I was about to have a show in Brussels at the Royal Museum of Belgium. And before the show, a year before the show, the director of the museum said to me, I like what you did with the residents of New York. I'd like for you to come to Brussels before you do your show here and work and do some homeless portraits here that we can include in your show. So I did, in Brussels, I did the Denizens of Brussels. And I didn't want to call them residents. And I like denizens because when I looked up the word denizen in the dictionary, it said that it defines it as a thing. It could be a plant, a human being, or a living thing that has, resides in a particular place. And so, it's almost like the denizens of Brussels. Some of them, many of them, are people who seem to be from somewhere else who are just there, like growth. You can't get rid of them. And so I did, the denizens of Brussels, and also I like the idea. One thing I found about the denizens as opposed to the residents is that the denizens are very surreal. They have cardboard houses in the subway. They're begging with children. This guy, he's sleeping with with a cardboard that says "sale." It's a sale, sold in French. This guy, he's in the subway, In New York City, you would not have someone like that. They don't allow people to sleep in the subway like that. Again, he's not really sleeping. He knows I'm there. Many people from Roma in Brussels, in Europe, in Paris in general, even in Sweden. I was surprised to see a couple of years ago going to Sweden from a show. I had a big show there. And, I've been to Sweden a number of times. But I always saw white people in Sweden. And now I started to see more people of color. And also I saw something I'd never seen in Sweden before, in Stockholm, and that's beggars. I like when my sitters, my models do things on their own. Pretty much that's what happens. A lot of times when I'm about to take someone's picture, particularly in this case with the homeless, we're setting up, the assistants are doing things. So it's a good 20, 25 minutes before we actually take a picture. And by then the homeless are either, they're doing what they normally do. They're staring into space or they're doing their thing, and these people, they started to kiss among them, and I like that. I call this one the kiss. Now I'm going to wrap up the presentation after I show you these. The images of the denizens were shown as posters for my show at the museum, at the Royal Museum, but also in the subway station, a very busy subway station as well. So I'm going to wrap up my presentation before our talk together by showing you a couple of more images of my work that have nothing to do with homelessness. This image, for me, is very important. It's called Milk Blood. And, you know, before this image, I was doing what I call typical tableau photography. I was taking pictures in a studio. There was a person, a concept, a prop, a background. And then I got a visit from a curator who was doing a show about artists, postmodern artists who were doing work that referred to something else, that looked like something else. And so I embarked on a series of photographs that I thought were anti-photography at the time, but now I think I could call them fake paintings, because they're photographs that refer to painting, but they're photographs. This one is a reference to Mondrian. It's called Milk Blood, and it's a tank filled with milk, another one with blood put together. And with this series, I was not using people, was not using objects, props, backgrounds, just color. I did this image, Milk, which I think it's very unusual photograph, because it's a monochrome of milk. I mean, monochromes are a dime a dozen in painting, but you don't see monochromes often in photography. Blood. And then there was another image, which I don't have, called Piss. And then after doing the bodily fluid images, which are very abstract, using milk and blood and piss, I decided to do what later became known as the immersions, where I put an object into the tanks filled with piss. And of course, this image, Piss Christ, is the most famous of the immersions. But, you know, it was, you know, people say you were being blasphemous, anti-Christian. I was born and raised a Catholic. I did my communion when I was like 8 years old. The confirmation I did when I was 12 years old. So I've been a Christian all my life. And but it was piss, it was Christ. So I had no other choice than to call it Piss Christ. And for me, the work, it dictates itself. You know, a lot of times the titles, they come as a result of seeing the work. Even before I make the image, sometimes I know the title. But I like to, like I said before, I like to be quite clear, precise, and direct with the titles. I don't like to hide behind words. Shortly after September 11th, I did a series called America, because I felt we had been attacked as the enemy. And so I wanted to show who the enemy is. And I started with the symbols of September 11th. An airline pilot, a postal worker, the fireman who had been working in the rubble for months. I got to say something about this photograph there. I lived with this woman for 7 years, and I never took a picture, because it's hard for me to take someone's picture for the hell of it. I got to be doing for a reason. I got to be doing it as a work of art. And so I never had a reason to take Tracy's picture when we were together. But a couple of years after we parted ways, and I started to do the America series, now I had a reason to take a picture of Captain Tracy Thompson, who was flying jets for American Eagle, and a postal worker, because we had the anthrax scare at that moment, a fireman who had been digging through the rubble, a FBI agent in a hazmat suit, convert to Islam. This is actually a set designer, and I saw him at a Valentine's Day fetish party where everyone was in black and dressed in fetish clothing. And I said to him, oh, listen, I want to take your picture, and I want you to come like that, you know. And he said, well, what about the roses? Because I wouldn't normally have the roses, except it's Valentine's Day. I said, yeah, bring the roses. And you got to be very specific with people, because sometimes you say, you know, come as you are, and then they change something. I took a photograph of a neo-Nazi once, and, you know, I saw a picture he sent me with a red tie, and I said, okay, come like that. And then he comes with a blue tie, so I had to send him to Macy's to go buy a red tie. Snoop Dogg. And this guy, you know? I hate to say that I'm ahead of my time, but sometimes I am. Should we do our talk?
Hi, Andre.
Hi.
Thank you so much for giving us an insight into your work. I'm Mon Shafter from the ABC, and I'm pretty happy that we ended up in an RSL, that the rain brought us here. It's a nice mixture of sort of culture sort of clashing together. We learned before that you went to art school in Brooklyn. I think you were in your late teens when you were there.
I dropped out of high school when I was 15 to go to art school when I was 17.
Right. What motivated you to make art?
You know, it was like a calling, and I felt like there was nothing else I could do or wanted to do. Actually, but I did want to be a singer. I wanted to be Bob Dylan. But everybody in my generation wanted to be Bob Dylan. But, you know, I didn't have a band, and you know, I really couldn't sing. And so and you know, that takes a lot of patience and practice and dedication. And being an artist, I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to do nothing except be myself.
The things that motivated you back then, are they the same things that motivate you now?
Yeah, I don't think I've changed much.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I wasn't making the kind of work back then that I did later on. I mean, in between, you know, my time, in between art school and later developing into a young artist, I did a lot of other things, and mostly drugs. Right. I took a lot of drugs and sold drugs in the 70s in the Lower East Side. So you know, it was sabbatical from art.
Right. Because your first solo exhibition was in New York in '85, so there was quite a decent amount of time between art school and doing that. So that was kind of drug kind of.
Sure.
Kind of
yeah.
times.
You know, I bloomed as a young artist in my 30s. I was a late bloomer.
Right. Okay. And what did that time in between bring to your art?
Well, it was exciting because there were a lot of exciting things happening in the art world, you know, in the 80s. I mean, I didn't see Warhol or Basquiat or those people. I came into play when there was more socially active art, including people doing exhibitions like with political and social issues like Group Material. There was a group called Group Material, and they were addressing issues such as AIDS, you know, and I had a connection to Group Material because at the time I was married to Julie Ault, who was one of the founding members of Group Material, along with Tim Rollins, who recently died, Tim Rollins of KOS. And they were very, very active in the art world, and Julie in particular, and Tim, but Julie, I credit her for kind of discovering Felix Gonzalez Torres, because even though he was a very good young artist, Julie invited him to be a part of Group Material, and from there he got even more exposure into the art world. So they were visionaries and politically active people, socially minded. Unlike myself, I never feel comfortable being part of a group, and so I'm more of a loner, and you know, I like to ride my own wave.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I find it really fascinating that you still consider yourself a Christian, and that, you know, you were raised a strict Catholic, considering how, you know, political conservatives wanted to paint you as this poster boy for anti-religion. Over the years, how has religious and cultural iconography informed your work?
Well, you know, I think a lot. You know, I've done work that I didn't think about my religious upbringing for about 20 years until I'm in my late 30s, and I start to do works like Piss Christ and other images. So it just comes back into my consciousness. And since then, I've recognized that, yes, I am a Christian, and sometimes I'm a Christian artist, a religious artist, although that's a bad word in the art world. People don't want to hear that word. But I'm not ashamed to say I'm a Christian, but I'm the kind of Christian who never talks about his faith unless you ask me. I'm not one of those Christians that talks about being a Christian unless there's a reason for me to do that. And yes, I've been, the poster child for blasphemy and this and that. I got to say that the last time I came to Australia, I went to Melbourne in 1997 for my show at the National Gallery of Victoria. And, I was very surprised when I got there at the airport that there was all these journalists waiting for me. And I didn't realize that there was a hoopla going on because the Archbishop of Melbourne had gone to court to try to get an injunction against Piss Christ being in the show. And even though he failed to prove that they were blasphemous, still he incited the people so much that the second or third day of the show, a kid went into the museum with a hammer, broke Piss Christ, damaged it. And then Timothy Potts, the director of the National Gallery, canceled the show, and I was amazed that he would be so cowardly about it. I mean, I feel like you don't have to invite me, but if you do, you got to defend the artist. If you're going to invite someone to do a show, you got to be prepared to defend it. And I got to say that I'm surprised, but I'm not really too unhappy about the fact that Archbishop George Pell is now in trouble himself.
Your work still gets vandalised, still attracts protesters these days. Do you think much has changed since those culture wars of the 80s and 90s?
I think things have changed, but I think there's a radical movement in art because of all the worldwide changes that have come about, not only in America but elsewhere. And the inequality, the poverty, the great divide between the rich, the poor, the middle class, and racially, and gender gaps, a lot of unrest, social, political, cultural. So it's we're heading for a very uncertain time.
Throughout your career, as we saw before, you've incorporated a lot of biological matter, whether it's piss or feces, corpses. Why did you go there?
Because it was just a natural thing that came to me. I felt I wanted to work with bodily fluids. People have asked me, were you referring to AIDS? And I got to say that when I was doing this work in the 80s, I was quite ignorant of AIDS, like most people, like many people. You had people like ACT UP and maybe Group Material and Felix Gonzalez Torres who were doing work about AIDS, but I was pretty oblivious about AIDS. And so, I can't say that the work referred to AIDS. You could see it in that context, but it didn't come out of that.
Right. Some of your critics have accused you of being, sensational or going out of your way to shock. So clearly they've been shocked. Do you find your subject matter shocking?
Not at all. I find it very normal for me. So I think controversy and provocation doesn't really work if you intend it. It's more accidental. Accidental provocations and controversies are the best.
You've said you returned to photographing the homeless after noticing an increase in homeless people on the streets of New York. We were looking at an infographic online which was saying there's like 63,000 homeless people in New York City shelters each night. That is massive. Some recent data from Australia, from our census, said that nationally we have over 116,000 homeless people, but our rate of people becoming homeless is increasing is increasing faster than population growth, which is pretty alarming. From your sort of New York perspective, what are these factors that are contributing to homelessness?
I think people don't care about enough about the homeless, particularly people who can do something really about it. The politicians, it's the money. It's you have to have programs, and you can't just depend on people on the street to give money. That doesn't solve the problem. That it just gives people a little money to survive. But the bigger problem is the responsibility of the homeless is society's responsibility. We pay taxes for a reason, and that's supposed to be to take care of everyone, not just those who can afford to have homes. And so I think it's a big it's a big mark on the soul of society that we can't take care of the poor.
Yeah, it's awful. I think in New York, there's been a threefold increase in people becoming homeless since 2000, which is just so shocking and so scary considering, the freezing climate during winter. I'm curious what the reaction in New York has been to your images of these people who are homeless.
Well, I think the best reaction was that people would actually look at the pictures in the subways, and many times they would take pictures of those pictures. So, the best that I could hope for with my work as an artist is to engage the audience, and so I think there was engagement. I'm not a champion of the homeless, and when I give money to the homeless, people say you shouldn't give money to the homeless because you should donate it, to a charity that gives money to the homeless because they're going to spend it on drugs or alcohol. And when I give money to the homeless, whether they pose for me or I just feel like giving money to someone I see, I give it without conditions. I mean, it's your business. I'm giving you money to do what you want. If you need to take drugs or alcohol, I mean, who am I to say you shouldn't do that if that's what you need to do? I find that if you have a job and you want to go home and drink yourself to death every night, nobody cares as long as you pay your rent. So it's not my business to be a judge of what the money should be used that I give to the homeless. I got to say though, in doing this thing with more art, after I did my part as an artist, they took homeless as one of their causes, and so they started to do something with the homeless, with kids, homeless kids, and so it was nice. I felt good that my work made them see the homeless, and it was an issue that they could wrap their heads around, because they're an organization that can get money, and they have high-minded goals and ideals. And so I was very happy that I could point them in the right direction, and they could take it from there.
What do your subjects themselves think of their portraits?
Well, a lot of times people who see them in galleries or museums, or in the case of the homeless in the subways, they're impressed because they're big, and they're always very impressed. They say, because they think it's a photograph, they think it's a small little thing. And then they see it's big and it's beautiful. They're always quite impressed.
And how do your portraits of people who are homeless kind of relate to some of your other portraiture work, whether it's the Klan or America Made in China? How does it all sort of feed together?
They're portraits. I think everything for me is a portrait. Even the cum shots that I did, they're self-portraits. I did the ejaculations, and so. All of my work is a portrait of me. And so it's only natural that when I take pictures of people and I'm talking about homelessness, or I'm talking about America, or I'm talking about the Klan, it doesn't matter the subject. I'm still taking pictures of people to represent those issues and topics. So it's all, one big portrait.
Cool. We might open up to our audience. I'm sure you guys have got a bunch of questions that you'd like to ask, and it looks like we've got a microphone down the front here and over that side. So perhaps put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. Yes, would you like to come to the microphone down the front here? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Andre.
Hi.
I was really interested in your Klan photographs, and I only recently found out that the couple that they basically designed that the hood and the outfit of the Klan sort of uniform made a fortune. And in some of your photographs, the imperial leader, and there were some with sort of slogans and badges. Is there some sort of hierarchy?
Yeah, there is. There's a rank. And the imperial wizard is, of course, the top dog. But then there's the clan. There is the nighthawk, and so the grand caliph. So there's different ranks. It's like an army, and they have their soldiers and their generals.
And was there some meaning to the green? So the imperial leader.
Yeah, he's the imperial wizard. So he's the leader.
And did you find out anything more about the meanings of all those, the colours and the badges?
Not really. I don't like to investigate too much about the things that I want to do. When I photographed the Klan, this one Klansman said to me, do you want to know more about the Klan? And he gave me some literature. And, but I don't, I don't put, because I always feel like I'm an outsider and a layman. And so I look at it from that perspective, that the audience is also an outsider and a layman. They don't know much about the Klan. They want to learn. And the only way I can teach them is to show them what I see. But they were interesting. They would talk about, particularly when they talked about nigger, Jews, and queers. They're very interesting people.
And just one last question. How did you come across these individuals?
Well, I made contact with several people, and I had to spend a couple of days working on one individual in particular. And once one Klansman, because at first they didn't want to pose for me, but once I got one Klansman to pose, then I could say, well, so-and-so, he posed, and so it was easier to get the second and third. But actually, I got the Imperial Wizard, who didn't want to pose for me at first, thanks to this lawyer who was representing the Klan and who happened to be Jewish. And in fact, a Klansman, they were going to court to try to get, this ban. They were banned from wearing the Klan hoods and masks in public, and they were trying to get the ban lifted. And a Klansman said to me, yeah, we're winning our case thanks to our Jew lawyer. But in fact, they lost the case.
Cool. Thank you for those questions. Would anyone else like to ask a question? Yeah, feel free to come down here.
Yeah, thank you guys for obviously sharing the insight. I was interested by the way you sort of speak about your tableau and how you construct your images, and particularly between the 1990s sort of insights into the homeless and the way that you presented that body of work compared to the body of work in 2013, because it's quite striking in terms of the composition and the formality of the portrait poses that you were initially using, and then however it is that you sort of engage the individual in the later series to present themselves. Does the way that you work with those various sort of formats inform the other when you cross back to them? Do you have preferences?
I feel like I go back between the abstract and representation. I go back from doing work in the studio, back and forth from going into the studio and outside the studio. But, I went to Cuba a few years ago, and I went to Jerusalem as well, Israel, a few years ago. And I couldn't just do work in the studio, although I did some work in the studio. I also had to use Cuba and Israel as my studio and photograph what I found and saw. So, the subject matter and the concept dictates the way that I will approach and photograph the thing I'm going to photograph.
Yeah. Is there any friction between what the concept is of the series and how the individual is sort of projected?
Yeah, not really. I feel like in a way I've been doing the same thing all my life, just taking pictures. And usually there's a person or a thing in front of me. There's one, 2 or 3 lights, a background, that's basically what I've been doing. But the pictures have been very different. I photographed guns. I did 2 covers for Metallica for Load and Reload. And actually, I didn't do covers for Metallica. Metallica saw those guys had seen my images, and they asked to use 2 of my bodily fluid images for the albums. But I feel like in that way, I've limited my art practice to photography. But once you know your limitations, you're kind of free to be all over the place. And, your only limitation really is your imagination.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Are you a Metallica fan?
I am now.
Anyone else like to ask one? Yep, feel free to come forward.
Thanks, Andre. That was really interesting, and a great pleasure to finally hear you talk about your work. It's really interesting because I have been teaching my students about your work for some years now and following your work, and it seems to me as if the homeless photographs and the photographs you've been showing us tonight in particular carry on a sort of oeuvre in regards to the abject and thinking about the abject in life, whether it be piss or blood, bodies, the homeless, or the Ku Klux Klan. And it seems to me as if the common thing across a lot of these is the unseen and the invisible. So to me, I feel like you're this sort of expert or master of bringing to us the unseen, things that have been erasure through societal norms and various other things. So do you feel that that's something that you seek out, or is it just kind of something that you feel comes to you somehow?
It's kind of difficult for me to just take pretty pictures of pretty things, But I like to find beauty in places that you don't normally think of as beautiful. But it's not like I always have to do this dark or controversial work, I love to take pictures of children, of puppies and kittens. But nobody wants that from me. And if I did that, they would find something sinister in it,
You should set up an Instagram page just for those. But those photographs of death I find incredibly beautiful, and so much of it is very beautiful. And I think that's what makes it very hard for particularly university students to kind of come to terms with this sort of dialectic between the beauty and the subject. So, keep going.
Thank you.
Well, I think the beauty and the beast is in all of us, especially in artists.
I think we've got time for one more question. Is there anyone up the back who'd like to come forward? Yeah, feel free.
You'd said about your when you went to Sweden that you had noticed with your exhibitions that there had all of a sudden you'd noticed homelessness, and I wanted to know, is that, do you think, an increase of homelessness at the time, or was it something that you just hadn't been aware of previously?
I'd been to Sweden a few times in the 90s, early 2000, and I think by 2014, 15, 16, they more homeless started to come, more immigrants started to come, more people that didn't look Scandinavian started to come. And so, we noticed it more, I noticed it more, but I also think that they weren't there before, not like this. But I think that's, the part of the theme and the issue at heart here with this exhibition is the fact that there's a lot of displacement, a lot of division along racial, economic lines, and it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse.
Definitely agree. It's trouble. But can I ask, do you think has the portraits that you take, have they changed at all with this kind of awareness of this, the increasing homelessness, or kind of going to Sweden again and noticing that change? Has that changed the way or the style that you kind of look towards in your portraits?
Well, not really. And, I don't think, well, I'm not going to say no, never, but I'm not sure I'm going to do any homeless portraits again for a long, long time. I mean, I could do homeless in Paris, I could do homeless here, I could do homeless everywhere, but I don't want to. It's not my job. And as an artist, it's at this time it's hard to sell pictures of the homeless, and I'm an artist. I don't do commercial work. I only make a living from the art I do, the work I do for myself, and so I've done enough homeless portraits that I feel like it's up to other people to carry on with that.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andre, you have created such an incredible body of work over 30 plus years. What's next? What's on your bucket list?
Well, the last thing I did was a show called Made in China, and last year I went to Beijing for the first time, to China for the first time, had a show at the Red Brick Museum, and so I did these portraits of not homeless people, of Chinese people. They're far from homeless there, The Chinese have a lot of money, I got to say. You know that because you see them here, in the good shops. But, the Chinese are doing very well. I was very impressed with China. But I did portraits of people in wedding dresses, traditional wedding dresses and gowns, but people, from all walks of life. Yeah, because it was, I was very impressed by the faces that I saw. And then before that, I did a show called Torture, and Torture is still traveling. And so, I got a lot of work out there. I don't have anything pressing that I need to do right now.
Okay.
Except maybe write my memoirs.
Awesome. Would love to read that. Your work is currently on show here in Sydney as part of In Your Dreams at UNSW Galleries. Can everyone please join me in giving a big warm thank you to Andres Serrano?
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.